Policy and Governance at the Kiev School of Economics. From November 2022 to February 2023, she is a Petrarch Ukrainian Studies Fellow at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies of the Elliott School for International Affairs, which is at George Washington University. In her research, she focuses on local democracy, social movements, and civic engagement, and business political arrangements at the local level in Ukraine. Her book, entitled How Patronal Networks Shape Opportunities for Local Citizen Participation in a Hybrid Regime, a comparative analysis of 5 cities in Ukraine, has recently been published with the Ibadim Columbia University Press. Oleksandra is also a consultant on open government, anti-corruption policies, and public integrity for international organizations, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe and the IIEP UNESCO. She holds a PhD in political science from the Free University of Berlin and an MSc in international administration and global governance from the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, and an MA in international information from the Kiev Institute of International Relations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Presence.
Thank you very much, Marco, for the introduction and also for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak here about what I think is somehow unspoken of a topic about the Ukrainian resilience in this Russian war against our country. And I will present today some findings of the research, which I'm doing together with my colleague, Oksana Huss, who is at the Bologna University in Italy. And we did it together as a part of our consultancy, actually for the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe. This is a political representation of self-government in the European countries, and it's not a part of the European Union. It's this bigger Council of Europe, which includes all European countries, but they kicked out Russia in 2022. So I will start with an empirical puzzle. So when we started to think about this research, actually, it was March, and because of the very asymmetric military spending between Ukraine and Russia, a lot of observers were predicting Ukraine to fail quite soon. But we see a resilience that happens despite this big military asymmetry. So this prompted our thinking about what else but a military capacity can explain the resilience of a country that is being invaded. At the same time, we also see that this war of Russia is a war against civilians. You probably know that a lot of civilians have been killed or injured, and official numbers are, as you see it on the screen, but they're much higher. We don't know that's exactly. Also, about 12 million people have been displaced. Just for you to understand, it's like a quarter of the population of a country had to be moving either within the country or abroad. There are about 6 million people who are abroad in different European countries. But also, Kiev School of Economics has been counting the material losses since March, and by November 2022, it was $136 billion. Like it's really hard to even comprehend these kind of numbers. But what it means empirically is that actually this is a war happening in municipalities, and local authorities are quite at the forefront of dealing with multiple crises. Energy crisis because of the damage to the energy infrastructure, the shellings, schools destroyed. And so all of it is actually in the competences of the Ukrainian local authorities. So we started to think, how do local authorities contribute to the resilience of Ukraine in this war? There is also a reason to look at the local authorities in Ukraine, because since 2014, Ukraine has made an impressive decentralization reform. In fact, when Ukraine applied for the EU candidate status, decentralization reform was praised by the European Union as one of the best reforms. So what happened? First of all, there was an administrative change. About 12,000 small incapable municipal units have been amalgamated in order to provide for better efficiency. There is now 1,439 municipalities, which is a big amalgamation. Then there has been a political change. So the principle of subsidiarity has been introduced. It means Ukrainian local authorities are responsible for education, for healthcare, everything that is in your locality, that is what they are actually responsible for. So it increased, in fact, their legitimacy as their authorities in the areas. And fiscal changes have been introduced. For example, these local authorities now have keep 60% of personal income tax. They also have some local taxes, which they don't have to wire back to the national budget before they get something back. So they have the money. And on top, in parallel to this process, Ukraine has been going through a digitalization reform. One of the most impressive, actually, and I'm not bragging here. So Ukraine is somewhere where Estonia and maybe Finland. This is the examples that we can compare to. So not Germany, for example, if you think European countries that are more advanced. So digital transformation is like that. I have an app called Dia. I have a newborn baby. I register it in my app. I'm done, right? No more. I don't have to do anything. So this has been happening in parallel. And after the Euromaidan, or so-called Revolution of Dignity, so there was a lot of things converging with the demand for self-governance at the local level, plus political opportunity and like structural opportunity, and has been a shift towards collaborative governance, which means that the local citizens are part of deciding how you govern your territory. There have been a lot of participatory tools introduced. I mean, I can talk about it if you want me later in the Q&A, so about what has been done. But martial law, so temporarily suspends electoral accountability. You cannot withdraw your deputy. Then direct democracy mechanisms like referenda are also suspended. Lowers transparency requirements. Ukraine has been at the forefront of open data. For example, about all assets of our public officials are actually public as open data normally. Now it has been closed because of security issues. And mayors have received some of the extra opportunities to spend money on security without consulting with their councils, actually. So that is our empirical situation, and the theoretical puzzle. We've been also thinking of how does decentralization play out in crisis management? Because actually there are two strands. On the one side, there is a downside to decentralization because multiple centers of influence, they can be competing with each other for resources and for influence, increasing efficiency of response and getting it slow and uncoordinated. But we also know from the research on the recent COVID pandemic in Germany, for example, that citizens actually, when their authorities when they collaborate, decentralization is more helpful because localities know better what is their issue, what is their context and the situation. Plus, citizens are closer to the authorities and they can assist the state with resources. So with this theoretical puzzle, we build some sort of it's a tentative proposition about what kind of governance can lead to resilience. And this is something we were exploring then empirically, which I will be presenting now. So resilience, we understand, okay, that's not right. We understand resilience as an outcome of governance processes which contain several mechanisms like foresight. It's thinking about multiple futures. It's not a hardcore planning. It's more like, okay, what do we do if Russians invade? Or what do we do if there is an earthquake? Who do we contact and what is so thinking of multiple futures. Vertical government coordination is very necessary in order to make sure that the response is streamlined. Then there's collaborative governance mechanisms that help in coordinating response horizontally. So municipalities between themselves, at the national level authorities, and international municipalities with other municipalities in Europe, and plus public engagement. So these are governance mechanisms which we think, when they are supported by technology, the digital technology, and underpinned by values of why do we even need to resist, like human rights and equality and equity, then through mutual learning and mobilization of resources, which are in that locality available, resilience can occur. So this is our proposition. So we looked at rather the governance mechanisms at this point. How did we do it? We ran a survey together first at the request of the Congress, but with big cooperation from the Association of Ukrainian Cities, that is the largest municipalities association in Ukraine. We had 241 responses. It's about 17% in local authorities. I can say we have responses from all regions but 2. And in every region, the number of responding municipalities are, on average, it's 18%. So it means also that we have also Eastern regions as Western, and most of them are in the center. Also, what is important to remember is we mostly have actually small municipalities in our sample. These are 50,000 people or less, urban and rural. So what I will be showing you here is not, and we only have 11 regional centers in the sample out of 24. But what I'm trying to say is that what I will show is not driven by the big, resourceful regional centers. This is actually, let's say, more like an average and more modestly resourced municipality. We also had qualitative, semi-structured interviews with representatives of local authorities, their associations with the respective parliamentary committee and the Ministry of Regions back in the day. Now it's the Ministry of the Recovery. So what we found, we were impressed to see that local authorities basically became actors of democratic resilience, not just holding on, but holding on how. So we see that they, 2/3 of our sample, they actually continued operating, and 72% of them provided administrative services, mostly did that in full, so whatever they are supposed to provide. Also, what is interesting is when they did their emergency decision-making, it was guided by council and executive committee decisions, which are, so the council is the elected body and the executive committee is the executive body appointed by the council. So it means to us is they were trying wherever possible to make collective, to use their legitimate authorities in order to make decisions. Not the mayor was not a decision-making point for most of the municipalities. And they even had council meetings 1 to 3 months after the full-scale invasion offline. So we also checked what is their trust, what is the public trust of local authorities. This is not our data, this is a representative of public opinion poll data from the August, so more or less when we did our survey, and we see that 63% trust to mayors and 60% trust to councils. That is actually very high, because before the full-scale invasion, the same poll was showing 48% of trust. It's on the one hand, it's actually normal that local authorities enjoy more trust than national authorities because they are just there, right? You see them. But for Ukraine, that has a standard, actually low trust, also inherited from the Soviet past, that is actually quite impressive. So they probably do something right. So what do they do? We looked at the use of digital technology in their response, and we asked what of their pre-existing help them to respond to the challenges of war. And what we find is like double result. On the one hand, we see that their data protection policies have been very helpful for 49% of municipalities. But what's alarming is, of course, this 30% they don't have it. So it means that it shows that you have to really invest in this kind of solutions, even though it might be expensive. And I think that from my qualitative observation at the moment, this is being understood and being worked on. Internal e-documentation. So especially for small municipalities, that's an issue because they all know each other. They have papers, they have their local authority as a one house, and suddenly they had to often manage their municipality while being in different points in there. So whenever they had it, again, for almost like half of those who had it, it was quite helpful, but 50% didn't have it. So e-governance platforms is so-so, and experiencing remote work, it helps, but actually not that significant. So we, in most cases from this slide, we make a conclusion that it's necessary to invest in the data protection policies and e-documentation from the experience of municipalities. Next, we ask them about their planning habits. And actually, although most of them said that they had emergency plans, we know from a different research of my colleagues at the Kyiv School of Economics at the Center for the Study of Decentralization that these emergency plans, they were sometimes even like Soviet type emergency plans where the threat was expected to come from the West. So, and it kind of resonates because they said 92 had it, but 62 found them out. At the same time, there was even scenario planning for about half of our respondents, which is very progressive. At the same time, planning horizon in general is quite short. It's just 6 months. And this is being now realized that it's too little, that you have to expand it. And if you look at the heating and the energy supply or the reconstruction of municipal infrastructure, at least there are a larger share that already plan with 3 years in advance. And in fact, Ukraine is now on the really planning its reconstruction already. On anticipation, I wanted to give you a few examples from our interviews and focus groups. For example, Slavutich, that is a city in the north of Ukraine, which was occupied quite fast. It's on the way from around Chernobyl, so to say. And they said that on the eve of the invasion, they had a meeting when they at least tried to understand what do we do, and was helped to coordinate this person personally. For planning for the heating, they are now thinking of what alternative use of fuels can we have. And this is the example is the city of Terminopil, which is in the west of Ukraine. So it only experienced missile strikes, but not hostilities. And the interactive map of bomb shelters was developed in January. We had the order to prepare protective structures. We were already preparing them little by little, just in case, to play it safe. And on February 24, we reminded citizens about it. That was very helpful to put down the house. Moving on to vertical coordination. As I said, this is crucial to exchange the information. And in fact, from the perception of our respondents, it works pretty well between the levels of authority, between the central authorities. These are regional military administrations, and these are district military administrations. Regional military administrations are the ones sort of under the presidential vertical, and they are the most resourceful now in terms of like military response or support of military response. So it's very good. And as an example of how this happens, although we call it vertical coordination, once we go in, it's very interesting that it's actually flattened structures, because regional military administration in Rivne, for example, they set up a council with all the heads of municipalities to decide what to do with a lot of internally displaced people who came. And they do things which we call actually data-driven policy making, because they take statistics from all communities to see who needs place, and then they also go to their communities to ask where there is place, and they sort of match the people. They make management decisions jointly in this council, and they coordinate with house owners, because they realized if we, like their first move was to put all people in schools, and then they realized, where do we put the kids then when the school year starts? So this is a part of the planning, like the next problem response. So the example, but except information exchange, it's also very important how decisions are made in the vertical. And here in the Ukrainian case, we see a rather paradox of missing feedback loops, because on the one hand, this slide shows us that central authorities actually coordinate with local authorities on strategic decisions. But the number 2 shows that many, about half, think they can't really influence those decisions. And in terms of whether there is feedback is taken account, we see that about 50%, like the yellow here and the gray here, they're even not sure what happens to the feedback. So we interpret this as a situation in which some parts of the municipalities, for example, associations, they take part in this kind of coordination. So people are aware of it, but then there is a missing feedback loop about what happened with the coordination. And we had a case with some financial regulations and some financial regulations. What are you allowed to spend money on? And there was like a case was that garbage cleaning was not allowed to be used on spending, and then happened and Bucha was liberated. As you remember, Bucha was a place where there were really a lot of atrocities happening, and they had to clean it. It's actually cleaning, garbage clean. They had to remove tanks from it. And so they realized that this regulation needs an update, and through communication, feedback to the central authorities, this was fixed in the end. But it happens sometimes with it rubs. Interesting that the horizontal communication is, I think, what works best in terms of Ukraine, and this network communication is, you can think of it as a flexible tissue that is able to catch the shocks and like dampen them. Because what we see here is that most of our respondents said that membership in local authorities associations was helpful for them. Because we know from our other question is that associations were in the top 4 institutions that provide clarifications on what's going on. Then the local authorities established links with other communities in Ukraine, and this was very helpful. And these were things like providing, for example, some municipalities smuggled food into municipalities that were bordering them but were occupied. Or they were helping to take the people in, and many other things. And international partnerships. So all these mutual connections, like personal knowledge with municipalities from other European countries, but also partnerships, twinning agreement. This was helpful to get a lot of help. So from generators, and Riga, for example, provided Lviv with generators. Riga also provided, Latvian capital, provided buses to Kyiv because many were destroyed. And there are many, these kind of exchanges going on. Plus now, cities like Madrid, Barcelona, they committed to rebuilding particular towns that have suffered. So this is now getting a bit more long term. And interestingly, that 35% of our respondents established international partnerships first while the rage was going on. And mostly what is interesting, and maybe it's an Ukrainian peculiarity, it's a focus on personal context. So mostly it's facilitated by personal contact. That's why a lot of if I'm asked, like, what do you do to support Ukrainian municipalities, their internationalization, just like study trips, study tours, that is people to meet each other. Okay, now this is that's my favorite slide, and I know it doesn't look that exciting, but I will try to walk you through. So we asked our municipalities whether they have introduced citizen informing or participation instruments while already since 24th February. And when they said yes, we asked them what was the purpose. So this slide shows how many our respondents said which purpose was the introduction of these tools. And in the blue, you see what we call pragmatic purpose of engagement of citizens and business. So coordinate supply and demand for help for the Ukrainian armed forces, attract external resources, and coordinate volunteers. This is an interesting development because normally citizen participation is viewed from the point of view of democracy and democratization as a value for governance, rather, or for value even for the political regime. But here they have a very pragmatic purpose because they are mobilizing resources. And what corroborates our findings is that we had some of these options were available in a similar survey we did in 2021. And attraction of external resources is our most grown category from that survey. So plus 33 percentage points of respondents said that they attract external resources. And I think it shows you that they understand they cannot solve this problem alone. And that is also what all the research on disaster management tells us. Then yellow is our so-called good governance goals. And that's to 2021. Trust, even increasing community trust, remains high, but it didn't grow. And if you think of that, you're a local mayor who is, energy production plant has blown up and you have thousands of people without energy, but still you're thinking about trust. It's kind of an interesting way of observing it. It is what we call the values behind this whole governance. Then another option here is engage direct stakeholders to problem solving. So let's say if I am affected, I am an internally displaced person, I can be engaged in solving my own issues of finding accommodation or a job. And here we even have a slight increase compared to 2021. In our opinion, it shows that authorities increasingly view citizens as partners also, and not just some clients whom you have to serve, giving them agency, essentially. But interestingly, inclusion just of diverse opinion, which we call consultation for the sake of consultation, has reduced. So less municipalities have time for this kind of just without any pragmatic goal, just making democratic facade or whatever. So one of the mayors said that war makes you more honest, and I think it's kind of also reflects in our data. And what is interestingly, especially, some of you might have heard Ukraine, corruption, big problem. At the same time, since 2014, there has been a very massive anti-corruption movement and anti-corruption institutional changes. And what we see here is that despite the war, Ukrainian municipalities are concerned to make sure that they are received as working with integrity, especially when it comes to humanitarian aid. And so we even have more municipalities putting anti-corruption as the goal for citizen engagement than we had in 2021, when it was peaceful times. And what does it mean? For example, they would publicize information about what kind of humanitarian aid they receive and what kind of people receive it, have pictures. Some have customer management systems, CRM, customer relationship management, like in the business, what they use for marketing goals. Ukrainian municipalities use it to track who received the aid. And finally, community well-being. As you see, it's quite high on the agenda for many. And what is interesting is, again, they engage people for community well-being. So not serving them or like being over them, helicopter parenting or whatever, but rather pragmatically engaging people into these goals. And okay, it's not very great, but these are just some pictures you might have seen also on the news, how people put together food packages or help cooking and so on. So this kind of very, very grassroots engagement. Our survey shows that it is systematic. Because, so this slide again looks very boring, but actually tells an impressive story of a shifting social contract in Ukraine. So this slide can compare to the same questions in 2021. And we asked what kind of stakeholder groups. So we asked them first, what are your main burning problem that you have been trying to solve most recently? And for them, it was accommodation for IDPs and humanitarian aid for people who have come in their municipalities. And then we asked, what kind of groups have you involved into different stages of citizen participation? So informing is like the lightest one, where you just one-way communication. Partnership is the one that is most profound when you share resources and the vision. So what we observed, compared to 2021, more municipalities engage someone. So in general, the engagement became broader. At every of these, we have a decrease of those who said that they don't engage anyone. Here was a small, actually here a small increase, but here and especially in these two, which are like the deepest engagement levels, there are fewer municipalities who said they don't engage anyone. Second, what we find is the role of entrepreneurs, businesses. This is the category that has grown in, you see, everywhere, in all categories. And this is amazing because if you're familiar with studies of political regime in post-communist states, business is usually viewed as in a bit of a negative light of rent-seeking using politics. But here we see business making a contribution to solving problem at the local level. And what is also interesting, the experts are actually reduced. So fewer municipalities said they involve experts. So my co-author Oksana Huss, she calls it democratization of knowledge. It's like the perception that people without a PhD degree in construction also may have good ideas in order to help. We don't know what is the reason. Maybe it's also a money issue, but still we see more engagement of businesses and less of just experts. Plus, we did not have a category of internally displaced people last time we asked, but you see that their proposals collected for possible solution here quite high, and here their feedback is also taken into account quite many. So in general, we can say that the citizen participation became actually wider and deeper. And it is something you may not automatically expect in the war. As I've been asked a good question, like we can expect in the war that people mobilize to solve problems. Question is whether they do it with the state structures or whether they do it outside the state. And in case of Ukraine, we see that the statehood keeps, because people engage also with the state institutions, or like what makes a state. So to say, it's self-government, but it's still kind of a state. And as an example of this kind of engagement, this is from Žitomer. So what we asked, this is a case of engagement with internally displaced people. And as he said us, IDPs themselves came to the local authority and offered help. So you see, very proactive. Then they did a survey through a chatbot, digital technology, and these were IDPs from Kharkiv, which is very like IT savvy region. And they made this chatbot. And after that, IDPs turned to work 24/7 on all fronts. Many were hired in the city council right away. And plus the local authority said, we brought businesses people to meet each other, and new businesses slowly started to open. So that is it shows also that the local authority is rather like a coordinator in communication flow. Okay, so to summarize our findings, first of all, we see that decentralization reform made favorable conditions for all of this to happen, especially the small municipalities of 50,000. They are the ones that benefited from the reform the most. And we see that it makes these local authorities backbone of societal resilience. So it's very important to, when thinking of recovery, is keep the decentralization reform. Then we also see that when there is martial law, when lots of traditional accountability in a democracy are not working, collaborative governance can support like legitimate emergency response. And this is something that democracies can learn from Ukraine, how to secure a security in a democracy. And then citizens, we see how citizens become partners rather than clients. And this is a shift of this, it's a paradigmatic shift actually, because Ukraine went from Soviet type of state-society relations where the state is here, the citizen is here. Post-Soviet is the state is here, the citizen is here. They operate in parallel worlds. What we see in Ukraine, also, it is not because of the war, it has been after the revolution of dignity that we see some kind of a coming towards each other, and what we call a new social contract where citizens collaborate with the state. But also we can think of experience of Ukrainian municipalities as asking questions for broader issues. First of all, they challenge, in our opinion, how we think of security just in military spending, and as if it's something that needs to be centralized. I mean, there are concepts of so-called polycentric security, when you don't centralize the response so much, but as I've been told in one of these presentations, that's almost like a theory yet. And in a way, Ukrainian experience gives empirical data to this. Then it gives us insight about new forms of public participation and accountability that don't rely necessarily on standard democratic channels. And we see the role of data and digital technologies for security. So data can reduce our security, right? Because of cyber attacks and so on, if everything's digital. But on the other hand, when you're away, you cannot go to your city council and so on. This whole digital infrastructure helps run the state, in fact. And a new question which we raise is how to organize governance processes that support societal resilience when there are such security threats. So that is all for me and for my input. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Very much, Oleksandra. So yes, if you have any questions, just raise your
Yes,
hand.
I do have a question in terms of Zelensky, his background and how within 1 year, he has really focused on military strategy and reaching out to the world. How do you see that fitting into this entire picture of hopefully the success of Ukraine surviving this?
So I wouldn't call myself an expert on Zelensky, but I can recommend you a book called Zelensky Effect by Olga Onov and Henry Hale, who show how Zelensky is representative of the cultural shift that has been happening to Ukrainians as a nation. Then I think Zelensky, maybe thanks to his background, even in the entertainment industry, he's very good in communications, right? In framing the messages. And I think we live in a world that is constantly more and more communicative, and we realize that what we have in our heads and how we think about things, that is how we then realize them. It can be, it's like what you think is possible. And so I think in Zelensky's communication and his presence and his being there, even though we know that he was offered a chance to leave, right? But he stayed. Of course, it helps to consolidate the nation. And when you have a legitimate president who is there with you, of course, it gives a better resilience, from this trust to your public institutions. So, of course, it's important that he is there, and it plays into our resilience for sure.
I also mentioned that we can open up the questions online. Send them to me. I will read them out. But yes, please.
Do you see while unfolding now? First, there's a question about how the aid is received and how the nation is transparent about it. Like you said, the CRM systems and all of that. And then how to project that. All of this, the aid is being used in the right way. How is it being projected towards the West when it is receiving the aid? And then how do you see it pan out all in future? In case, right now, there are a lot of talks about the need of more weapons. So how do you see it all pan out?
Okay, I hope I understand your question. You can correct me if I answer something completely out of this. But so first of all, we should all make it clear, the governance in Ukraine is not any precondition for giving or not giving Ukraine weapons, because weapons are needed to make sure that we exist as a nation, that our schools are not destroyed. It's not about this, it's not this whole conditionality that you can apply in this situation. At the same time, we only know about allegedly big corruption in Ukraine because there are free media, investigative journalists, and anti-corruption activists who have been raising these issues as high as in the United States to sanction our own parliamentarians. Like, how many countries, activists in this world have actually advocated the US Congress to sanction their own MPs? I don't think there will be that many. So in fact, I would say, Ukrainian society has become even less tolerant to corruption than it was before the 2014, or what led to the 2014 Euromaidan. So the problem is there, but no society is free from corruption. But the Ukrainian society has shown now that it is ready to fight it even when there's war. So even if there have been recent scandals, we are not afraid to talk about it. And the president of Ukraine took steps that were in his authority to do that. And that there are also National Anti-Corruption Bureau that has done its job, part of its job, that there is a high anti-corruption court that has to look at these cases. So for me, this just shows the function that the institutions that we've been building, and it has been a really hard work, but they're working. And you should also think in terms of the European states had about 500 years to develop from their feudalist to the current liberal democracies. Ukraine so far had 30 years of independence after Soviet Union, which also was not a very anti-corruption friendly place. So Ukraine made a big move, and that's why I am myself very optimistic that we will be able to keep this going. And when we now talk about recovery of Ukraine, anti-corruption is super high on the agenda. And also, I'm like the only one person whenever I can. I also say how we need to include municipalities into all these recovery discussions, because municipalities are under the supervision and control of their communities, and that's how you can prevent embezzlement of the international funding.
Any more questions? Yes.
So you mentioned that this survey was run on 17% of decentralized communities.
Yeah.
Can you please specify the geographic spread? Because you mentioned like north and then west.
Yes. I'm going to look up here not to make the numbers wrong. So we had all regions, but we did not have Kherson and Lviv region. So we don't know why, honestly. So Kherson, I could imagine because of the hostilities, while Lviv region didn't respond. I think it's a communication issue. So somehow we didn't reach them. Then in all regions, we had 18% of municipalities, but in some we had very few. So in Luhansk region, we only had one municipality answering. Makes sense. Yeah. In Ivano-Frankivsk, for example, 31 of municipalities. So some are higher. And I also checked on macro regions in terms of how much overrepresented or underrepresented the macro region is. And actually center is just slightly, so 34% of Ukrainian municipalities are considered to be in the center. I mean, it's very arbitrary. Some the division is a bit arbitrary, but basically center is slightly overrepresented by 4 percentage points. And east is overrepresented also by 3 percentage points, and south and west are actually underrepresented. So we are not sure exactly why, especially for west. So sometimes we think they're just too proud to answer this kind of survey. Those who know Ukraine, they might understand my joke, right? But generally, we are not trying to say this is a very representative survey, but it's why the only one survey that has more responses than ours is another survey by Kyiv School of Economics with 400 responses. And let's say after they ran it in March. People, I think, were more eager to respond. We ran ours in August, and when our colleagues ran one in November, they got even less responses than we did.
I have a question. So immediately preceding the full-on invasion of Ukraine last February, Ukraine, like the rest of the world, was dealing with COVID. Do we know how much the interaction between local and trust for local between citizens and local government, how that was affected by COVID, and then that at all affect then how it responded to the war that immediately followed it?
COVID was really a case for decentralization. What I will say, you can judge differently, but basically, when local authorities were not happy with the regulations from the center, they were not afraid to do their own thing. And let's say why. So I will give you a case of Lviv. At some point in time, the cabinet ministers said that you are not allowed to do to have markets open on weekends because of the spread of virus or whatever. Lviv market sellers, these are usually small entrepreneurs. Their living actually relies on selling things on this market. They were really against it. They were going on demonstrations and so on. So actually, Lviv City Council announced that these will be working days. They made a city council like a regulation which Saturday and Sunday making it a working day. So then you're allowed to do a market. And in my opinion, it shows you that they have made a choice towards their municipality and their community, and this cohesion and their people being able to get money, and not to the cabinet of ministers. And I mean, after that, and it also gave a bit of a leverage to renegotiate the COVID policies at some point. And we saw, I did not do a really systematic study, but we saw a lot of cases when especially small entrepreneurs were protesting these kind of regulations, and the local mayors were on the side of the entrepreneurs. So I think COVID showed the strength of self-government and community holding together.
Vasilis?
I think it's impressive how you did this research during the war. And I don't know if you want to say anything about people's like, you know, the proclivity to respond to you, or were some people just sort of like, are you kidding? I don't have time for you. But I guess I wanted to ask a broader question about how to phrase this. This is a pretty positive picture, which is great news. Do you sense, I know you did this survey in August and September, do you sense any kind of, or what would you say about how people are responding to the continued missile strikes on energy and infrastructure that affects their daily life, and how that, how that beats people down? And just given your knowledge, and this may be speculative, what would you say about how people are likely to blame local or mayoral authorities versus central authorities for that, in case it's getting worse, or in case they just feel over time, in case there's this, I don't know if this is the case, but I think we should be worried that Russia's strategy could work in the sense that people get tired of living like this and get tired of having to deal with power outages. It seems like it improved a little bit recently, but I'm not sure. And so if you could comment on that fact, or sort of introduce the factor of missile strikes or dealing with inconvenience that make life hard in the face of trying to do all of these other things that you found that people are doing, and the way the local communities are engaging. And just based on what you know about people's greater trust in local authorities, do you think that would continue? Or do you think that missile strikes or barriers to living a normal life in the face of energy outages might lead to people to blame, mayors? Or do you think they'll save it up for central government, or both?
Honestly, I think most Ukrainians, especially when we are not talking about very, very tired frontline communities, because it's a little bit different, but in general, everybody is quite clear who is to blame. So they blame Russia, and nobody blames Zelensky or their mayor for the lack of electricity. And we can see how popular culture portrays, for example, the emergency services and electricians, and they are heroes on par with soldiers. So I think there is quite some trust in these municipal services. They became much more visible. I recently watched a really good, it's a German journalist who traveled across Ukraine from Kharkiv to Lviv, and interviewed also emergency services, and they also say they feel much more appreciated at the point. So people make a lot of jokes about them, but these are in popular culture or like TikToks, but it is very kind, I would say, most of the time. So I don't have a feeling that people will blame the mayors, but of course, with time, there is a critique growing of like, why do we buy expensive generators that need expensive fuel in order to dig water, if we can just use some mechanical type of technology in order to make a well and let water come out. So these kind of discussions already happen. And it came from my colleague in the Drohobych in the West. They realized it, and they actually, the municipality is now paying a special company to, don't ask me how, but to get the water from the bottom in some kind of mechanical way that doesn't need electricity. So, and I think in municipalities, they have a chance to get this kind of critique faster and maybe do something. How about missile strikes? People are tired. I mean, it's really hard to live this. You don't know, can you make your work now? Can you make your food now? And so on. So Ukrainians come across as very some kind of super people, but we also shouldn't underestimate they are people. That's why it's very important to get this help. But at the same time, there are many of us are also very angry people now because of this, and people are standing. So I don't know how long. I also see a lot of on social media, for example, a lot of hope now for spring coming, because it should be easier because it's not going to be so cold. But yeah, regarding the and I also see communication changing from some mayors. They also understand that they have to be more proactive in doing this whole energy situation. Of course, there are some mayors, like in a small town where my parents are from, the mayor has been the problem. He has been pro-Russian. When the Revolution of Dignity happened, he actually ran away, looked around, see how things will go, and then he came back. But yeah, it's Brovary. And in this town, unfortunately, there were some democratic forces, but they were not enough to overcome the administrative resource that was at the disposal of this mayor. He's mayor now. He did, let's say, he continues a little bit business as usual. But I would say in many cases, we have a bigger difference. And how to do research in the war. So I more ask, how do they even work in the war, right? Because doing research in the war is, I did also field work in September. I was in some cities, but not in the front line, but in the West and in Kyiv. And you feel always like you want to ask really questions that matter. And that's why it's so important for me that I had a project with this consultancy, because these results, we presented them to the European Union, presented them to the Congress of Congressional authorities, and at least some way of channeling this into maybe real support. And I think in general, you want to bring more value if you do research and tell people that it's something maybe for.
Other questions? We still have a little time.
Do you want to know about participatory budget in Ukraine? I think it's like a has anybody heard about participatory budgeting?
You have, yes.
We have it here in New York.
Okay.
Yes, you have a very cool format where you have the council, like parliament members who have money, and they said, okay, we will chip it in for this project, right?
Right.
Yeah, I know it's impressive.
And you can vote on whether you want how much percentage of that budget to go to what project.
Right, and it was amazing because they made a lot of effort to reach to people who don't even vote. Yeah. They tried to see the invisible people, so to say, with this project. In Ukraine, participatory budget works a little bit differently. It's a part of each municipality has a so-called development budget, and then they take 1 to 3% of a development budget for the projects of the people. In bigger cities, this can be a substantial amount. Then what happens is that you have a first part of the year, usually March, when teams make their projects and present them to the municipality, usually via a digital platform. And it's interesting that people work together to design this project, and they work with the municipality, because you have to find out, let's say you want to make a library, a special technology for the library for people, for blind people to be able to read the books or something. You need to, you have to go to this library, you have to find out what are the needs. If you want to build somewhere a fountain, you have to find out where is this municipal land where you're allowed to do that, right? Because that is not private. So this communication happens, then they go, they meet in their, it's usually a working group. So several people come together, design this project. Then it comes on the municipal website on a special platform. Then people can vote for it. And usually, since they started in 2014, 2016 was the first. The schools have become really like they hijacked all the projects because they belongs to the parents, obviously, and the children and the teachers. And then they all have these families and so on. On one hand, it's great because it's like a community mobilization. But for example, people who just wanted to improve their park in the neighborhood, but they don't have so many children and parents at their disposal, they will get upset. So next year, they said, okay, 60% of the budget of this goes to the Samtel and Lviv experience. Okay, we take 60% to schools, but 40% is, okay, no schools, just like their own bucket. Then they try to find some kind of way to put this into more inclusive, make it fairer. And every year they changed, cities tended to change things in regulations. Like Zaporizhia, for example, also went, Zaporizhia is constantly under missile attacks right now. But they also were thinking, okay, how do we change the whole cycle because of people to reduce this kind of conflict? And what happened, so between 2016 and 2022, many cities already had, cities and the village communities, they had this participatory budgeting, and some of the most active people who won the budgets, they then became candidates in 2020 municipal elections, and some of them won. And as Anastasia told me, her research is on, and her showed that there are people with no political experience that have come to the 2020 municipalities. And I don't want to say it's all because of participatory budget, but these kind of things, they reveal the community leaders of different kinds who work collaboratively, again, like this collaborative governance. And even though some cities, of course, tries to hijack this a little bit, or the council members, they love it. Like, they say that it's a participatory budget, but a project would be initiated by a council member, and then he's gonna put on it like a table said, thanks to council member so-and-so, right? In some cities, in Kropivnitsky, they said, okay, it's not gonna work like that. So they made official tables and they control that it says it's for the money of participatory budget and not some kind of counselor and so on. So for me, it shows learning by doing, making mistakes, going to next cycle, improving mistakes, to next cycle, improving mistakes. And this is so different from Soviet style of planning that was inherited by Ukraine, that when I think of the size of the like cultural shift, it's to me mind-blowing. And we did also research with my co-author Oksana Huss in Donetsk region. It's really painful because I was in Konstantinivka and in Drushkivka. It's a smaller towns next to Kramatorsk. I've been to Kramatorsk too, and I saw there how these communities were remaking their schools. They use the technology in order to have open data about the funding for their school, to control that the school administration, for example, doesn't ask them for money that they had already gotten from the state. But basically, the problem was that there is an issue at schools that parents have to make donations, and it is not always clear what is it for, whether this is duplicate. For example, you get funding from the state, but they still ask for the same things. Or a biggest issue is things like toilet paper and soap. Usually there is no money in the budget for it because nobody never tracked how much do you need of this. And then the parents constantly get to pay 50 hryvnia, 100 hryvnia a month for these things. And it's not that much, and people are not asking too many questions. But some parents actually ask these questions. These are people from Kherson, of all places, and they developed a system which takes open data from the finance. For each school, you can see how much the state gave money, plus you could report how much the parents gave. And in these towns in Donetsk region, in Drushkivka, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka, parents really use this data, not just control their administration, but to see where can we get more money. And they did fundraisers, they went to donors to make projects, rolled them together with the teachers and some principals. And in this kind of collaborative way, they got more money for their schools, and they mobilized the community again. And the city of Kramatorsk actually did statistics on the parental contributions for this toilet paper and soap, and put this money for their next year's budget, because now they have data about what it is used for. It was in 2019, so they planned it for 2020. And after that, they also introduced the Council of Parents in Kramatorsk in order to have better dialogue with parental community, between the local authorities and parental community. So these kind of things, they're everywhere, popping up here and there in different policy fields. But for me, it also just shows this really shifting relations between state and the citizen, and citizens as owners of state.
So
Yes, please, and then.
I'm sitting here in sort of in awe of what you're saying, only because you see the news and all you see is cities just annihilated.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to reconcile the picture of an annihilated city and then the high functionality of what you're discussing and doing participatory, but budgeting.
Don't do it at war.
Pardon me?
It's not working at war.
Okay, so that explains what, but I'm sort of also puzzled as to what a percentage of Ukraine is functioning as well as you indicated it has. Because again, you just see the horrors, and I'm just amazed that it's actually that it's able to function as well as it does. So it's like, is this sort of like 30% of the country is still making it?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't think anybody can answer you this question. I know there are about 50% of businesses that had to close in about May. It was in May that I have this data, but again, it was estimation from economists. So now I don't know, it feels like some businesses reopened. So this we could judge, or we could judge how many people stayed in areas that are really under hostilities, and of course, very few stayed. So a lot have moved, but those have moved, they start a new life or don't, but at least they try to live. Plus, those who moved abroad, they are still very connected, and they send money and so on. And it's really, I don't know, I have no way of saying how much of the country is functioning.
Yes, please.
I heard many years ago that the Ukraine area was the breadbasket of the
Yeah.
world. And I'm curious as to how much of the economy was based on that. And now it's also been affecting Northern Africa and places in the world where they cannot get the food that they need. What percentage of the economy do you know prior to the war was actually part of the breadbasket?
Does anybody know the number? Sorry, I have to say I'm really not like an economist that I can tell you, and it's really awkward, but I cannot tell you. I understand that there was industrial production was quite a big part also, but until 2014, then it reduced.
Yeah, I don't have a figure for you, but it's a substantial part of the economy, agriculture, and a lot of the issues, obviously
The
affected
biggest
by the
wheat
war.
producer.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, sunflowers.
And sunflower oil.
They're a huge producer of that. And of course, that's been affected both, producing it and then shipping it. And,
Is it
storing
your
it.
opinion that this is one of the reasons that Putin has been looking at Ukraine?
Oh, no, 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 no,
No,
no.
in terms of the economics of that, you know?
No, if he wanted something economic, would he had been shelling all his fields and destroying the whole infrastructure? No, I honestly think his motivations are very, very genocidal. They just don't want Ukrainians to exist. And that's why it's so dangerous when somebody says that Ukraine should find some kind of compromise and maybe give some territories and so on, because Ukrainians are being killed because of being Ukrainians. There's no other reason for it.
Culture is just 10% of Ukrainian today.
10%.
Yeah,
What was that?
I thought it was pretty
10% of Ukrainian GDP.
Thank you.
Yeah.
IT industry has been growing a lot.
But you're right to say that there's a lack of production of food now, and other countries are trying to step into the breach and make some money from that because Ukraine's exported food is way down.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, and like you said, I mean, it was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union.
Oh, Ukraine, there's even a paper called Ukraine and Bread Basket on Europe from SDP in Germany. But I think I'm not, like as you said, didn't have a feeling like it's so important for the Ukrainian economy, like in the numbers.
If there are no more questions.
Can I ask one more
Yes.
question?
Yeah.
What do you think in the war time that local cities need or maybe can't, or local authorities really need in order to function better, that maybe they can't get? Like you said, I mean, this is not really about your research, I guess, per se, but what do you think, like, are they partaking of the probably, huge financial assistance that's coming to Ukraine, or is there kind of systems? I mean, did you observe any kind of systems in place in which, in reaction to the war, there are new ways in which resources are distributed, down from the center to the local authorities?
Of course, the principal way of distributing resources didn't really change. So whatever the taxes they collect, they collect here. What has improved actually, I think because the state, so many people are in the army now, and because the personal income tax is paid where you live, I think, then it means that the local municipalities now some actually improve their financial situation because of the high salaries of the soldiers and the army, like military personnel that work there. It's not only this reason, but it is. The big discussion is how do you distribute the money that is coming for the reconstruction, and this is where now a lot of debate is going on, because I would say it's a bit natural, but the central government wants to centralize it. They want to make, there is central government of Ukraine, but then there are also World Bank, IMF, who also think that maybe they should manage these resources. And one of the battles is being fought is to make sure that it's a Ukrainian institution that manages this money and not a World Bank agency. Say again?
That's absolutely right.
It's absolutely wrong to have it outside of Ukraine, because we will never build any institutions if we don't manage our own money. But once we do that in Ukraine, it's a question: how do you institutionally include municipalities into the distribution of these resources? So one of the ideas that is now very popular with the Ministry of Territorial Development, Infrastructure, Recovery is to have project-based reconstruction. So it means that there is a digital system where municipalities give the projects for what needs to be reconstructed, and then the donors like World Bank or I don't know, Columbia University wants to, they just look like in a catalog and choose projects that they want to support. And then every step of a project is managed digitally, so you can see how money is being used. So this is now the sort of most popular version between among the Ukrainian government, but I think municipalities have to be better included into methodology how to make these projects, and it's a big question of because projects will need to be evaluated for their quality, they will receive some kind of scoring or something. So this whole methodology of evaluating the project and who participates in evaluation is also very important. This is not solved. And this is, I think, where is not enough municipal participation at the point. So we need to like put it more upfront. The European Union or European Parliament, for example, even recently made a whole resolution, and in this one resolution, it was not on local governance, but 3 or 4 times they mentioned how the local recovery should be localized, because they also see it's not enough transpiring from how Ukrainian government currently sees it. Yeah, there is also an initiative of the Committee of Regions. It's called European Alliance for Recovery of Ukraine, and this will be what the municipalities and regions in the EU can do in order to support recovery. So I think it will be a very horizontal way, not necessarily via the central government, and that's okay.
Is there any effort being made to bring people, say all the people, millions of people who've gone to Poland,
Yeah.
to reestablish them back into the Ukrainian?
Their cities.
Yeah.
There are lots of talks about it. But that's another way. So that's why it's so important. So I was asking one of the municipal leaders, what do you need in order for people to return? And the answer was, we need the anti-aircraft weapons and anti-missile weapons, because then we can protect the schools, we can protect the cities, kind of like make an Israel over each Ukrainian city, and then people will return, and I can understand them.
Yes.
Has the government completed the process of drafting military age men into combat? That to fill in jobs that they can.
Actually, women also went to the army.
Yes.
So we have now 5,000 women in the active front line. So
Men stepped in to fill the job.
that's a good one. So this data I don't have. The government doesn't have, so Ukrainian men are now, if they're under 63, they are all like militarily, they have to, if they're called, yeah. So they cannot leave the country. But I don't think we have a mobility 60.
So 60 or 63, I thought it was 60.
Oh, it's 60.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Sorry. Because it's not concerning me. And the women say, but there's no mobilization going on now. I think you can go there by contract, but if you sign the contract, it's like until the end of the martial law. So when you make a decision to go now voluntarily, it's basically until the war ends. So,
If I'm not mistaken, I think there are even instances where so many people were trying to register to join the army at the beginning of the war, that then they were just being like turned away.
Yeah.
They had like more people than they needed.
Yes.
I'm not sure that is like that anymore.
Yeah, I'm not.
A year ago,
now,
yes.
but
It
at
was a
least,
year
like,
ago, yeah.
They got there really quickly.
I've
My
recently-
friend's son couldn't join after maybe like a month. They don't need experienced people. They don't need people off the street.
Yeah.
That's
Because
they
it's
don't
very
want to-
technologically advanced, actually, how they find it. It feels like they need programmers there and coders.
I've recently read a report that 27,000 males are waiting to join the army. So they're, part of them are undergoing training and part of them are still on the waiting.
It's interesting because I have a feeling usually Ukraine doesn't really say even how many we have.
Yeah, that's why I said media report, like, sure, it's written.
No,
Yeah, like, maybe research journalists can take it up.
or maybe they mean some kind of, yeah, I don't know.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Keudel, for talking about your research on local governments and how it's adding to this resiliency in Ukrainian I don't know about the rest of you, but it was, I don't know, it's good to have some good news. It's very positive. So thank you so much for that and for the discussion. Thank you all also for your questions. This was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you for the question. We have a paper. So as part of it, actually, we published with a colleague in the Formers memos. Do you know Formers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, if you want, give me your contact. I can just email it to you.